The voice cut through the murmur of the courtroom like a blade dragged across stone, sharp, clipped, laced with the unearned confidence of youth. Judge Darren Calloway did not look up from the papers fanned across his bench. He did not need to. The authority was in the tone, and the tone said that whoever was standing in that gallery had better make peace with their knees, and quickly. The man still standing was named Earl Deacon. He was 83 years old. He wore a simple gray work shirt, faded at the shoulders, tucked into worn dark jeans. A canvas jacket the color of old military olive hung from his frame without ceremony, carrying the faint smell of rain and wood smoke. His hair was silver white, cropped close to the skull, and his hands, resting at his sides, were a cartographer's dream, mapworks of wrinkles and liver spots, knuckles like polished river stones, but steady. Perfectly, almost unnervingly steady. He had not moved when the judge spoke. He had not flinched. He simply stood in the third row of the gallery, as rooted and unhurried as a man waiting for a bus he had taken every day for 50 years. The courtroom smelled of floor polish and stale coffee. The fluorescent lights overhead threw flat institutional glare down onto the polished oak bench, the worn gallery pews, the pale green walls. The air conditioning rattled with a persistent tubercular hum. A young court reporter sat at her machine with her fingers still, watching the old man over the top of her monitor. Two bailiffs stood near the side door, one already shifting his weight forward. The gallery, perhaps 30 people, had turned almost as one with the rubber-necked curiosity of people who smell a confrontation forming. "Sir," Judge Calloway set down his papers. He was 44, compact, with a tight jaw and the bearing of someone accustomed to every room adjusting itself around him. His eyes, finding the old man in the gray work shirt, carried the flat patience of someone managing a minor inconvenience. "This court is in session. You will sit down, or you will be removed. I will not ask a third time." Earl raised his eyes. They were pale blue, the color of a winter sky at the exact moment before snow, and they possessed a depth that was difficult to account for in a face that otherwise announced nothing. When they found Judge Calloway's face across the width of the courtroom, the judge did not look away exactly, but he did blink. "Once, I have a right to stand for a moment, Your Honor," Earl said. His voice was low, a gravel and timber quiet that did not need volume to carry. "Old injury. Knee locks up if I sit too long." It was not a plea. It was not an excuse. It was a statement of fact, and it hung in the air with quiet precision. Judge Calloway stared at him. Then the flat patience in his eyes hardened into something else, the particular annoyance of a man whose authority has been acknowledged but not, he felt, sufficiently deferred to. Bailiff Hess. The taller of the two bailiffs, Thomas Hess, 26, built like a defensive lineman in a polyester uniform, took 2 steps into the gallery and put his hand on Earl's arm. Earl did not resist. He lowered himself into the pew with the careful economy of a man who understood exactly what his body would and would not do. His hands settled on his knees. His back was straight. His expression had not changed once since the judge's voice first found him. Not when Calloway's tone went hard, not when Hess crossed the gallery, not when the hand landed on his arm. He was simply, completely still, the way stone is still, not because nothing has happened to it, but because it has absorbed everything and given nothing back. The morning moved on. The air conditioning rattled. It was when the docket stalled on a procedural matter that Judge Calloway's attention drifted back to the gallery, and apparently to Earl Deacon, who had shifted one hand to the pew in front of him, not rising, just resting, and whose lips were slightly apart. "If you have something to contribute to these proceedings," the judge said, With the flat precision of a man who very much did not want anything contributed, you may do so from the stand. Otherwise, this gallery is not a forum. Earl looked at him. I don't have anything to contribute, Your Honor. I just know the man on the stand. The date he's giving for the property line survey, it's wrong. He was in the hospital that week. His wife can tell you. A silence. The judge's jaw tightened. You are not counsel. You are not a witness. I know what I am. Something in those 4 words made Hess, near the side door, look up. It was not defiance. It was not sarcasm. It was the simple declaration of a man who had never, at any point in his life, needed someone else to tell him what he was. Bailiff Hess, the judge said, I believe our gallery member could use some fresh air. Hess put his hand on Earl's shoulder. Earl rose. He moved toward the side door, and the room watched him go. It was as the door was half open that Judge Calloway said it to the gallery as much as to Earl. The kind of statement that makes itself comfortable in a room's memory. I don't know who told you that veterans get special standing in my courtroom. But this bench applies the same standard to everyone, and I would strongly recommend that anyone else who has received similar misinformation take note. Earl stopped in the doorway. He did not turn around. No one told me that, Your Honor, he said. I didn't know I was doing anything wrong. I was just sitting with my knee. He stepped through into the corridor. In the corridor, Earl settled onto a bench beneath a window that caught the afternoon sun. He reached into the breast pocket of the canvas jacket and withdrew a folded cloth, old, dark green, worn nearly translucent at the creases, and spread it slowly across his knees. The cloth held a medal. It was the size of a man's thumb and had no subtlety to it, a gold star suspended at the center of a cross with an eagle crest, and blue silk so old it had faded to the color of bone. A ribbon the colors of the American flag. Around the star, barely visible, was an inscription worn almost smooth by decades of being carried in a pocket instead of displayed on a wall. Earl looked at it, not the way a man looks at a decoration, the way a man looks at a debt. The corridor dissolved. The smell of floor polish and stale coffee became the metallic tang of blood and wet earth, and the afternoon window light became rain slanting through triple canopy jungle, gray and relentless. And Earl Deacon was 21 years old and lying prone in the mud of Kung Tre province, with his cheek against the stock of a rifle that was not his. The rifle had belonged to Master Sergeant Carroll Deeks, who had carried it through Incheon and the Chosin Reservoir and 2 subsequent tours in Vietnam before a mortar fragment took him off the line. Pressing the weapon into Earl's hands from a stretcher with fingers that were cold and strong, saying, Son, that rifle knows things your eyes don't. Listen to it. Earl had not been sure, at 21, whether that was wisdom or the morphine talking. Lying in the mud with the rain coming sideways and a platoon of 43 men pinned 600 meters south waiting on him, he decided it didn't matter. The target was on the ridge. The scope couldn't find what his eye couldn't provide. The rain distorted everything, and the wind off the ridge was complicated. Not one wind but 3, running in different directions at different elevations, and no program had a category for that. Earl watched a single blade of elephant grass protruding from the tree line and read the way it lifted and fell and lifted again, the slight hesitation at the top of the arc, and he understood without calculating that the highest wind was slower than it looked from the ground. He made the adjustment. He made the shot. 31 of 43 came home from that day. Among the 12 who did not was Corporal James Aurelio, 20 years old, from Beaumont, Texas, who had been Earl's spotter for 14 months, and who 3 days before the ridge had pressed a letter into Earl's hands and said, Mail this if I don't come back. You know how she worries. Earl had mailed it. The metal in the cloth on his knee had been pressed into his palm in a hospital in Danong by a general whose name he had forgotten, while his leg was still bandaged, and the general had said something about valor and sacrifice and the grateful nation. Earl had nodded, and then asked about the cookies. Had anyone found James's cookies? The general had not known about any cookies. The corridors solidified around him. His hands were 83 years old. Steady, he folded the cloth back over the metal. Doris Leatherwood, the court's victim services coordinator, had followed him out. She was standing 6 feet away, pretending to consult her phone, and when Earl looked at her, she looked back. "I'm sorry about the judge," she said. "He was doing his job." She sat on the bench 3 feet away. She had noticed the small silver pin on the inside lapel of his jacket when she passed behind him in the gallery. An eagle with folded wings, an anchor, a wreath. A Navy cross? She was nearly certain. Her grandfather had kept a photograph on his bureau of 3 men in utilities standing in a jungle clearing, and he had once held something similar in his palm and told her its name in the voice people use for sacred things. "Mr. Deacon," she said carefully. Earl, that pin on your jacket. Is that a Navy cross?" "It is. Marines? Long time ago." She was quiet a moment. "My grandfather talked about a man, a scout sniper. Kung Trur 1969. He said the enemy had a name for him." Earl looked at the window. "The Ghost," he said. "That's what they called me. My unit called me something else, less poetic." Doris stood. "I need to make a call," she said. "I'll be right back." She walked to the far end of the corridor and pressed a number from a card in her desk drawer. A colonel from Fort Campbell who had said 4 years ago at a veteran service event, "If you ever encounter someone who needs more than paperwork, this line goes somewhere that can help." The phone rang twice. "This is Colonel Margaret Harkness." "Colonel, my name is Doris Leatherwood. I'm victim services at the district courthouse in Clarksville. There's a man here who was just removed from a courtroom. His name is Earl Deacon. He's wearing a Navy cross." The silence on the other end arrived like a wall. It stretched for 4 full seconds. "Say that name again," Colonel Harkness said, and her voice had lost its professional ease entirely. "Earl Deacon. Earl Chester Deacon? I don't know his middle name. Where is he right now?" "In the corridor, outside courtroom C. The judge had him removed. I don't know what's about to happen in there, but do not let anyone touch him." The voice was urgent now, stripped of all formality. "Do not let him leave. Help is on its way." The line stayed open, and in the background Doris heard a chair scraping hard across a floor and a voice that had gone somewhere very different from public affairs. "Get me General Withers. Not after his briefing. Now." Doris walked back to the bench and sat down and watched Earl Deacon watch the afternoon light move across the corridor wall. And she held the secret weight of the phone call. And the gallery door inside was closed. And behind it, Judge Calloway's docket continued. And Hess stood near the side wall. And none of them knew what was coming. 7 miles away at Fort Campbell, Major General Thomas Withers had stood up so abruptly from a briefing table that the colonel mid-sentence had stopped entirely. The general was already at the door when he said, "Get my car and call Sergeant Major Chen." Chen, when he heard the name, had gone still for a moment and said, "The Earl Deacon?" And Harkness had said yes, and Chen had moved with a speed and intent his subordinates had not seen from him in years. Inside courtroom C, Judge Calloway had resumed. The air conditioning rattled. The court reporter typed. Then the sound came. A siren, distant at first, a low urgent wail, then building into something that filled the corridor, and then the percussion of boots in a stairwell, many of them moving with coordinated precision, and the bang of a heavy exterior door thrown open below. The gallery door opened. 3 soldiers in army dress greens entered first and moved to positions at either end of the gallery with the practiced wordless economy of people conducting a perimeter, and every head in the room turned and Judge Calloway's gavel hit the desk. "This court is in." Major General Thomas Withers walked through the door. He was 61, 6 feet 2, with 3 rows of service ribbons on his left breast, and 2 stars on each shoulder, and a jaw like the prow of a ship. He did not look at the judge. He did not look at the gallery. His eyes swept the room and found the corridor door and moved toward it without slowing. "General, this court is in session." Withers stopped. He looked at the judge. It was a look refined over 4 decades and 2 combat tours in rooms full of people who needed to understand the difference between authority derived from an institution and authority that lived in a person. The judge, to his credit, understood almost immediately. "I'll need 1 minute, Your Honor," the general said. "Then I'll explain everything to this court's satisfaction. You have my word." He was through the corridor door before Calloway could respond. He stopped when he saw Earl. The professional control in his face shifted in a way that was very small and very complete. The way a face shifts when it has been carrying a long-held thought and has just found the place to set it down. "It's been 22 years, the general said. 23, Earl said. Withers made a sound that might have been a laugh. Then he straightened, and something in his bearing changed, became formal, deliberate, public, and he brought his right hand up. The salute was the sharpest, most breathtakingly precise thing Thomas Hess had ever witnessed. It was not a formality. It was a statement, rendered with the full weight of 40 years and 2 stars, directed at an 83-year-old man in a faded work shirt who smelled of rain and wood smoke, and who stood in the corridor, holding himself, with the quiet of something that has absorbed more than it has ever been asked to show. The salute held. 1 second. 2 seconds. 3. In the gallery doorway, a collective murmur moved through the assembled watchers, not quite a gasp, not quite a breath. Something that happens when 30 people simultaneously experience a reordering of their understanding of the room they are standing in. Earl raised his hand. The return salute was correct and clean, the muscle memory of it perfectly intact. And when his arm came down, the general crossed the corridor and took his hand. They went back inside. Withers produced a folded document and set it on the council table and looked at Judge Calloway, and his voice when he spoke was respectful and entirely without apology. "Your Honor, this court has a guest this morning whose identity I'd like placed on the record." He turned to the gallery. "The man you see is Gunnery Sergeant Earl Chester Deacon, United States Marine Corps, retired. He served 3 tours in Vietnam with the 1st Force Reconnaissance Company, attached to MACSOG, the Classified Special Operations Command. He holds the Navy Cross, the Silver Star, 2 bronze stars with valor, 3 Purple Hearts, and as of November 3, 1969, the Congressional Medal of Honor." The gallery did not move. The Medal of Honor was awarded for actions on a ridgeline in Quang Tro Province, in which Gunnery Sergeant Deacon, wounded in the left leg, remained in position under sustained contact for 11 hours, directed supporting fire that saved a platoon of 43 Marines, and then carried 2 wounded men back to friendly lines across 600 meters of contested terrain. He paused. The citation describes what he did as beyond the reasonable expectation of human capability under those conditions. He let that settle. The enemy in Quang Tro Province had a name for him. They called him Bong Ma Thung Leng, the ghost of the valley, because he went into places they controlled and came out again, and afterward things were different, and they never saw him coming and never found out how he left. The silence in the room had a density to it now. Withers looked at Thomas Hess. He looked at Judge Calloway. He looked at the 30 people who had watched an old man get told to sit down and then escorted into a corridor because his knee was bothering him. The United States Marine Corps does not forget men of this caliber, Withers said, and neither do we. Judge Calloway called a recess, a meeting in chambers. Short, when the judge emerged, he crossed the gallery to Earl Deacon and said something quiet and private, and Earl listened. And when the judge was done, Earl nodded once and said, "I appreciate that, Your Honor." Hess stood near the wall for a long time after, not going anywhere, holding his hat in both hands. When the room was mostly clear, Earl walked to where Hess was standing. The knee managing itself, the canvas jacket settled on his shoulders with the ease of decades. He stopped in front of the younger man and put a hand on his arm, the same arm, approximately the same place, that Hess had put his hand on Earl's arm that morning. Hess looked at the hand. He looked at the old man's face. "You were doing your job," Earl said. "I didn't know, no," Earl said. "You didn't. None of you did." He was quiet for a moment, and when he continued his voice was the same low gravel, devoid of triumph, the voice of a man who has thought carefully about what he is about to say. "The title helps. The bench matters. The badge and the rank, they matter. But none of that is what earns the room. What earns the room is in here." He tapped his chest once above the breast pocket where the folded cloth lived. "And it takes a long time to earn it. A lot of what it costs you don't find out about until after you've paid." He paused. The quietest man in the room is often the one you should listen to the most. He took his hand from Hess's arm. He turned and walked toward the door. About 6 weeks later, on a Tuesday morning, in a hardware store on the east side of Clarksville, the kind that smells of sawdust and linseed oil and pipe compound, Earl was in the lumber section, running his thumb down the edge of a board, reading the grain. He heard the footsteps before he saw the face. Thomas Hess turned the corner of the aisle. He was thinner than he had been 6 weeks ago, or perhaps seemed that way without the uniform, the polyester and the institutional padding of the title all removed. He wore civilian clothes and moved with the posture of someone who has set something heavy down and is still figuring out how to hold himself without the weight. He stopped when he saw Earl. "Mr. Deacon," he said. "Hess." Earl looked up from the board. "How are you getting on? I've been thinking about what you said." He paused. "I wanted to say I'm sorry for what happened in the courtroom." Earl looked at him. The pale blue eyes, the winter sky, the depth the surface didn't show. "I know," Earl said. He held the board out. "Hold this end a minute." Hess took it. Earl ran his thumb down the grain, reading something in the wood that he seemed satisfied with, then said, "Good," and took the board back, and neither of them needed to say anything else. Earl walked toward the counter. Hess watched him go, the slight hitch of the knee, the canvas jacket that smelled of rain and wood smoke, the back of a man who had been carrying things longer than Hess had been alive and who gave no sign of setting any of it down. There are men walking among us every day who earned their quiet in places we will never go, and they ask nothing from us but the dignity of being seen for what they are. They do not announce themselves. They do not need to, but sometimes, in a corridor or a hardware store or a booth at a local diner, if you look at the hands or the eyes or the small worn thing turned inward on the lapel, you will understand that what you are standing next to is not ordinary. and that the debt we carry to such men is one that no courtroom and no title can discharge. Only a quiet moment will do it. Only seeing them. If you were moved by Earl Deacon's story of quiet courage and timeless wisdom, hit that like button, share this video with someone who needs to see it, and be sure to subscribe to Veterans Valor for more stories of America's unassuming heroes.